Others only knew me as the unattainable crush of the Cargill heiress, unaware that I was suffering from a terminal illness with little time left. Before my death, I was bound to a system. Make Audrey Cargill fall in love with you within 33 days, and your illness will be cured. I returned to England with hope, only to discover she was keeping a young actor as her sugar baby. She said he was just my replacement. When danger suddenly struck, I shielded her with my body, but she abruptly pushed me towards the blade, making me take the fatal stab meant for her young actor. As I lay in a pool of blood, she only cared about his safety. The system declared the mission a failure but gave me a chance to choose again. Later, when I held someone else's hand, Audrey Cargill broke down. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. The day I saw Audrey Cargill again, it was pouring rain. When the sports car stopped in front of the company, I saw Audrey's familiar profile through the passenger window. 5 years of suppressed longing and love surged forth, nearly bringing tears to my eyes. I took a nervous, excited step forward, only to freeze in place the next moment. I watched as she turned her head, kissing the man in the driver's seat passionately. After what seemed like minutes, they reluctantly parted and opened the car doors. The smile on Audrey's face vanished the instant she saw me. She stared at me intently, her voice seeming to squeeze through gritted teeth. Byron. Walling. After 5 years, hearing her say my name again sent a sharp pain through my heart. I said in a trembling voice, Audrey, I'm back. Audrey silently looked at me, her eyes full of complex emotions. I understood she resented me for leaving without a word 5 years ago. But on that night when I was diagnosed with severe aplastic anemia, I'd rather have her hate and resent me, then slowly forget me, than waste her time on someone with an uncertain future. During those 5 years abroad, in every moment tormented by illness, thoughts of Audrey were all that kept me going. However, as my condition worsened, death still came for me. Just as I was losing consciousness, a voice suddenly rang out in my mind. System bound. Please specify task and reward. Make Audrey fall in love with you within 33 days, and your illness will be cured. The feeling of impending death vanished as the system extended my life. Lying alone in the hospital bed, my mind filled with images of Audrey's radiant smile. I never dared hope to see Audrey again, but now the system had given me a reason. If death was to be my ultimate fate, at least I could use this chance to see her one more time. Audrey and I gazed at each other through the curtain of rain. Just as I was about to speak again, the man from the driver's seat walked over and affectionately took her hand. Audrey, who's this? He asked. He turned to face me and I looked at him. We both froze as our eyes met. We looked very similar. He gripped Audrey's hand tighter. Eamon, go wait for me in the office, Audrey said softly, patting the back of his hand. Eamon lowered his head, his voice sounding a bit pitiful. You'll come soon, won't you? Audrey smiled helplessly and kissed his cheek. Don't worry, I'll be quick. I watched it all unfold before my eyes, my heart constricting painfully as if gripped in a vice. Eamon left, leaving only Audrey standing face to face with me, her expression cold. Audrey, I wanted to ask but felt too uneasy to continue. Audrey knew what I wanted to ask. She curled her lip and said nonchalantly, He's just a plaything I keep. After a pause, she continued, At first, I treated him as your replacement. And now, my heart felt suspended in midair, anxious and aching. Gareth, she enunciated each word. You have no right to interfere in my life now. In an instant, the color drained from my face. Audrey's words were like a knife, severing the thread suspending my heart, letting it shatter into pieces. What Audrey said was true, but I wouldn't give up. I know. I tried to keep my smile from looking too pained. Audrey, can you give me a chance to make amends? Audrey neither agreed nor refused. She simply lifted her foot and walked past me. I need to get back to the office. You should go, don't follow me. I turned with her, but obediently remained rooted to the spot, silently watching as she entered the building. A system voice sounded in my ear. Target Audrey Cargill has appeared. Mission initiated. Countdown, 33 days. When Audrey Cargill left, there was a deliberate indifference in her eyes. But I knew her, and I understood her awkward nature. The fact that she didn't flatly refuse meant there was still hope for reconciliation. After seeing Audrey, I returned to the home I had left 5 years ago. Everything in the house was the same as when I left, only covered with a thick layer of dust. I casually pulled open the bedside drawer and paused when I glimpsed the ring box inside. Tugging at the cord around my neck, a ring dangled from it, swaying gently. This was one half of a pair, with the other half in Audrey's possession. In the early days of our relationship, Audrey and I had crafted these matching rings ourselves, carefully placing them on each other's fingers, secretly hoping to bind one another to our lives forever. However, times had changed, and so had we. A few days later would be Audrey's birthday. When I called her, I was so nervous that I couldn't stop clenching my fists. Thankfully, she answered. "Audrey, are you free on the 27th? I'd like to celebrate your birthday with you." I anxiously awaited her response, as if waiting for a verdict. "All right." After hanging up, I felt as if I was walking on air. When I came to my senses, I rolled around on the bed in sheer joy. On Audrey's birthday, I took her to the restaurant I had booked. Our table was on the second floor by the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a beautiful view of the river. Pink roses, her favorite, adorned the table, and the sound of a cello played softly in the background. Audrey's initially cold demeanor softened somewhat in this atmosphere. The waiter brought out the cake I had prepared in advance. I lit the candles for her and looked at her expectantly. "Audrey, make a wish." During those 5 years abroad, I would buy a cake on her birthday every year. Through the candlelight, I would imagine her sitting across from me, earnestly making a wish. Now, she was finally here in front of me, and I felt an urge to cry. Audrey closed her eyes slightly, her hands just beginning to clasp together when a sudden ringtone interrupted. She opened her eyes, picked up her phone, but frowned slightly upon seeing the caller ID before hanging up. However, a moment later, the caller persistently rang again. "Didn't I tell you I had plans tonight?" Audrey answered, her tone somewhat impatient. I could faintly hear a male voice on the other end. He seemed to be crying. Suddenly, Audrey's expression changed. She almost stood up but held back when she glanced at me. "I'm coming back now." Hearing those words, my heart plummeted from the clouds. She hung up and said somewhat awkwardly, "I'm sorry, something urgent came up. I have to go." Before I could speak, she grabbed her bag and hurried towards the stairs. "Is it Eamon?" I asked softly. Audrey heard me, but she only paused briefly before walking past me and leaving without looking back. The candles were still burning. I gently blew them out. The system dutifully reminded me in my ear, "Pursuit mission countdown, 28 days." I sat alone in the restaurant until closing time. Many couples were seated around me, facing each other. Once upon a time, Audrey and I were just another ordinary, sweet pair among them. I gave a bitter smile, shoveling cake into my mouth bite by bite. Tasted a bit salty, a bit astringent. Finally, the waiter hesitantly handed me a tissue. "Sir, would you like to wipe your tears?" I took the tissue, thanked him, and walked out of the restaurant alone. Back home, I clutched my phone, leaning against the headboard and waiting all night. Audrey didn't contact me. Perhaps her mind was occupied by someone else, leaving no time even for perfunctory messages. She hated boundaryless disturbances the most, so I didn't dare send her messages randomly, fearing I might annoy her. However, the next afternoon, she surprisingly called me of her own accord. "I was remiss last night. When are you free? I'd like to treat you to dinner." My heart, which had been dormant, suddenly came alive. I forgot all the anguish and carefully yet excitedly replied, "I'm free anytime." Audrey seemed to chuckle. "All right then, let's meet tomorrow at 7 p.m. At 7 p.m. sharp the next evening, Audrey arrived punctually. I had been waiting there early, and seeing her made my heart leap with joy. Audrey took the menu and started ordering. After selecting a few dishes, she casually said, "Let's order some seafood too. It's your favorite, isn't it?" These words exploded like a thunderbolt in my ears. The smile froze on my face as I stared at Audrey in disbelief. After not hearing my response for a while, Audrey looked up puzzled, then froze when she met my gaze. A few seconds later, her expression became flustered. She remembered, "I'm allergic to seafood. Actually, after seeing Eamon Carlisle at the office that day, I went home and searched for information about him. I learned that he was a newly debuted celebrity with a rising trend of popularity. During my search, I accidentally clicked on one of his interviews. The host asked several questions, one of which was, 'What's your favorite food?' He thought for a moment and said, 'Although some can be troublesome to eat, I still love seafood the most.' At the time, I didn't pay much attention to it, but now this answer haunts me like a nightmare. I spoke with a trembling voice. 'Audrey, who really loves seafood, is it me, or is it Eamon?' This was the first time since our reunion that Audrey Cargill appeared so flustered in front of me. She tried to explain, 'Gareth, I misspoke just now. I remember you're allergic.' Her voice gradually weakened under my sorrowful gaze. Finally, she reached out and placed her hand over mine. 'Gareth, Eamon is nothing but a plaything. He's just a substitute for you. Is that so? I don't know.' Looking into her eyes, I only felt confused and uneasy. When seafood instinctively came to her mind, who became whose substitute between Eamon and me? After that day, Audrey's attitude towards me changed. She was no longer so cold to me, and would even take the initiative to send me messages. When I asked her to go to the cinema, she quickly agreed. Before entering, I saw the movie poster standing to one side. It showed Eamon Carlisle and a girl embracing face to face. This was his new film, which I had heard about, and because of the filming of this movie, there were rumors about him and the lead actress. I noticed that Audrey's gaze deliberately avoided the poster. Throughout the entire film, she seemed somewhat distracted. I hesitated for a moment, then tentatively asked, "Audrey, is everything all right?" Audrey came back to herself, shook her head and smiled at me. "It's nothing." Before we parted, she suddenly asked me, "Gareth, have you ever been to a film set? Why don't we go and see one tomorrow?" As long as I could be with her, I was willing to do anything. I nodded in agreement. Audrey was an investor in that TV series, and we were warmly welcomed. It wasn't until we were seated and I looked at the actors filming on set that I saw him, Eamon Carlisle. Eamon Carlisle was the male lead in this TV series, and the actress opposite him, who was performing a scene with him, turned out to be the female lead from the film they had worked on together. I knew that in the entertainment industry, this was called a second pairing, and in such situations, the male and female leads were very likely to be the subject of gossip. After finishing a scene, Eamon looked towards the director and also noticed Audrey Cargill and me sitting nearby. He widened his eyes slightly and ran over to us. "Audrey!" He stopped in front of Audrey Cargill. "Why are you here?" Audrey's tone was cold. "Do I need to report to you when I come to see the show I've invested in? Or do you have some secret you can't let me see?" Eamon pressed his lips together. "That's not what I meant." He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, looking somewhat unhappy. "It's fine that you came, but why did you have to bring unnecessary people?" Audrey frowned. "Eamon." Eamon immediately fell silent, but his eyes were full of grievance as he stared directly at Audrey. Audrey uncomfortably avoided his gaze, and just then, the director called Eamon over. She turned to me, her tone reassuring. "Gareth, don't take what he said to heart." I forced a smile. "I won't." In fact, the moment I saw Eamon, I realized that Audrey might have had other intentions for this set visit. But since she didn't say anything, I pretended not to know. At least she was still by my side. Eamon continued filming, and there was one scene where he needed to fall into water and then be rescued by the female lead. But the director kept thinking Eamon's falling posture wasn't attractive enough, so they shot this scene over and over with Eamon falling into the water and climbing out again and again. It was early autumn now, and the weather had already turned cool. After several takes, Eamon started shivering. Audrey sat next to me, her fingers gripping the armrest tightly. Finally, when Eamon fell into the water for the 6th time, she turned to the director and said through gritted teeth, "I think this take is fine." The director was stunned for a moment, then seemed to realize something and nodded repeatedly. All right, this take is good." I saw concern in Audrey's eyes as she looked back at the set, while Eamon, toweling his hair dry, smiled at her from afar. During a break in the photo shoot, Audrey went to the loo. I walked to a corner, trying hard to suppress the bitterness in my heart. I'm not a fool. I could sense Audrey's concern for Eamon. Suddenly, someone stood in front of me. I looked up and saw it was Eamon. He had changed into fresh clothes and still had makeup on, looking strikingly handsome. He smirked at me disdainfully. "Gareth, enjoying the show?" I stared at him coldly, saying nothing. Eamon laughed. "You must be feeling quite chuffed that Audrey brought you here. Do you think she's having a change of heart and falling for you again?" I suddenly felt afraid of what he might say next. "Let me tell you, don't be daft," Eamon said. "She brought you here today because she's angry about my rumored affair. She's using you to make me jealous." It felt like the last shred of dignity had been stripped away. In that moment, my blood boiled and I shouted at him, "She didn't. You're talking rubbish." Eamon sneered. "You know best whether I'm talking rubbish or not." His gaze fell on my neck, and he reached out to pull out the necklace with the ring. "So it is this piece of tat," he said through gritted teeth, then yanked it hard. The cord snapped and the ring fell into his hand. I stared wide-eyed, frantically trying to grab it, but he dodged me. "You made this together? Ha! Too bad I've already chucked hers away." The next moment, he tossed the ring carelessly into a nearby sink. "Yours doesn't need to exist either." My heart shattered as I watched helplessly while the ring traced an arc through the air, landing with a plink at the bottom of the sink. I stood stunned for a moment, then turned in a rage and punched Eamon hard. He didn't dodge at all and cried out in pain when hit, drawing everyone's attention. Seeing the male lead had been struck, everyone rushed over in a panic to check on him. At that moment, Audrey returned. Seeing this scene, her face tightened as she pushed through the crowd to stand before us. Eamon clutched the spot where I had hit him, pitifully clinging to Audrey. "Audrey, it hurts so much." Without asking what happened, Audrey immediately scolded me harshly. "Byron Wall, how could you hit him?" My anger turned to sorrow in that moment. Fighting back the sting in my nose, I said, "Audrey, the ring. He lost it." "What ring?" Audrey frowned, completely unaware of what I was talking about. "The ring we made together back then. You told me to keep it safe." Tears welled up as I struggled to keep my voice steady, though it still trembled. "I've always worn it. I listened to you." But Eamon threw it away. Audrey was stunned, her expression softening slightly. However, Eamon quickly tugged at her hand, showing her the small cut on his lip. "Audrey, is it bleeding?" Audrey's face darkened again as she said to me, "If the ring is lost, it's lost. We can always buy a new one. That's no reason to hit him." I felt rooted to the spot, staring at Audrey in disbelief. So this was how lightly she regarded the ring, how easily she could discard our past. But that ring had given me the courage to persevere through countless painful, desperate nights. Touching it was like holding Audrey's hand, giving me the strength to keep living. Now it was gone, and a piece of my heart had been carved out with it. Eamon Carlisle was escorted away to have his wound treated, even though the small injury would heal on its own shortly. Audrey Cargill followed by his side, not sparing me a glance. With the male lead gone, filming couldn't continue. Many crew members cast reproachful looks my way, blaming me for the delay. I walked to the edge of the pool and stared blankly for a moment before plunging in headfirst. I had to find it. The pool wasn't too large, but searching for a tiny ring in it was extremely difficult. I soaked in the water for nearly an hour before my fingertips finally touched a hard, circular object. Joy instantly overwhelmed me. I grasped it and broke the surface. I had found it. A few scattered crew members remained, looking at me as if I were mad. But I paid no attention to others. I climbed out of the pool, dripping wet, wanting to show the ring to Audrey. I wanted to tell her that if I could find a ring lost in the water, we could also recover our past feelings and memories. Someone told me Audrey was in Eamon's dressing room. But as I approached with the ring in hand, through the half-open door, I saw the two of them locked in a passionate embrace. I felt cold, and in an instant, my heart plummeted. Audrey had her back to me, her head tilted slightly as she yielded to Eamon's advances. Eamon caressed her back and, between kisses, looked up at me with eyes full of triumph and challenge. I don't know how I made it back home. When I came to my senses, I had been sitting on the floor for a long time, clutching the ring tightly in my hand, a circular mark imprinted on my palm. I gave a bitter laugh and put the ring back in its box. From now on, seeing it would no longer remind me of those sweet moments with Audrey, but only of today's pain and humiliation. My body was still very weak, and after the day's ordeal, I developed a high fever that night. In my delirium, I called Audrey, saying I felt like I was dying. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I dragged my feverish body to answer it with great difficulty. The moment the door opened, I collapsed onto Audrey. I felt her struggling to help me to bed. It seemed to have started raining heavily outside, with occasional muffled thunder. I curled up in fear. Audrey wet a towel and placed it on my forehead to bring down the fever, but soon I heard her answer a phone call. She was leaving, she was going back to Eamon. Realizing this, I painfully raised my hand and gripped her sleeve tightly. Audrey, don't go. Please don't go. But Audrey pried my hand away gently. Gareth, I've left the medicine on your bedside table. Remember to take it. Eamon is making a fuss about seeing me. I'm afraid he might do something stupid. Be good. I shook my head wildly, tears flowing from the corners of my eyes, soaking the pillow. Audrey, I'm so scared. She left anyway. The door locked with a click, and at the same moment, a clap of thunder exploded in the sky. My heart raced faster. Cold sweat soaked my back, and fear nearly overwhelmed me. I'm terrified of thunder. A few years ago, my parents died in a car accident. When I received the terrible news, there was lightning and thunder outside. Since then, I've had post-traumatic stress disorder triggered by thunder. Audrey knew all this. In the past, during every moment of fear and breakdown, it was she who stayed with me, held me, comforted me. But now, on this thunderous night, she had abandoned me. She didn't want me anymore. In the moment before I lost consciousness, I mustered all my willpower to dial 999. For me, a high fever could easily trigger other symptoms and potentially cost me my life. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The system chimed in timely. I need to remind the host that the countdown for the mission is 15 days. Only half a month left. I stared at the stark white ceiling, lost in thought. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. On the second day after my discharge, Audrey Cargill came to see me. I looked pale and weak. Audrey awkwardly asked, "Did you take your medicine that night? Are you feeling better now?" My illness is incurable, I thought to myself, but I nodded to her. "Don't worry, I'm better now." Audrey sighed in relief and handed me a glass of water. I took the glass but didn't drink. Instead, I looked straight at her and said, "That day, it was because he threw away the ring." Audrey sighed. "You've told me, I know." My eyes lit up slightly, but then she continued, "But that's no reason to hit someone. Eamon is a celebrity. How can he work if his face is injured?" The brief spark of hope extinguished. I responded quietly, "It won't happen again." I no longer held any hope. Even now, Audrey didn't understand that the ring was more than just a ring. She didn't notice my dejection and began to look around my room. I wanted to say this last time I was here, nothing has changed. She spotted the photo frame on my bedside table. Contained our first picture together, youthful yet beautiful. "You still have this?" "Yes, I do." I looked at her. "I've kept everything related to you." I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a photo album and handed it to her. The album contained all the photos taken since Audrey and I got together. Apart from our pictures together, there were shots of her captured by my lens. She looked through them one by one, her eyes welling up. Some memories, perhaps, don't exist solely in my mind. I crouched in front of her, looking up into her eyes. Audrey, are you willing to continue these memories with me? Audrey was silent for a long time. Finally, she smiled at me and said, all right, after 5 years, I once again became Audrey Cargill's official boyfriend. The joy of regaining what was lost even dulled my illness. After Audrey left, I couldn't help but smile foolishly. A voice echoed in my mind. Host, the conquest mission is not complete. Audrey hasn't truly fallen in love with you. I said softly, I know. The system fell silent. From the beginning, I did all this not just to complete the mission and extend my life. More importantly, I wanted to make up for my abrupt departure 5 years ago and return to Audrey's side. Although she hasn't truly fallen in love with me yet, I'm very happy as long as she's willing to accept my feelings. After that day, I met with Audrey every day. We had meals together, went shopping, and went on dates. Sometimes when she was busy with work, I would quietly stay in her office. Even without talking, I felt very happy. 5 days before the conquest mission deadline, Eamon Carlisle came looking for her. He burst into Audrey's office, ignoring my presence, and said to her with reddened eyes, Audrey, I don't believe you're serious about him. There's nothing between Elsie Chadwick and me. Please stop being angry, okay? Elsie Chadwick was the actress he was rumored to be involved with. Audrey looked away and said, Get out. Eamon tried to hug her, but I stepped in front of Audrey to block him. He was dragged out by security guards who had rushed over. Audrey embraced me from behind, as if to comfort me. Byron, don't listen to his nonsense. I love you. I softly replied, I love you too, Audrey. If Audrey could see my expression, she would notice the sadness in my smile. I had seen what she looked like when she truly loved me, so even without the system, I knew clearly what was real and what was fake. I only hoped that in the last few days of my life, she could finish acting out this play for me. On the last day of the countdown, I prepared a romantic date. As I led Audrey Cargill out of the office, I said to her, You're going to love today's plans. But just a few steps out the door, we were stopped by Eamon Carlisle again. He looked at Audrey mournfully and pleaded, Audrey, please don't be angry. I'll do anything as long as you don't send me away. He glanced at me and said, I'm even willing to be his substitute. Eamon's acting was indeed convincing, but I still caught the hatred in his eyes when he looked at me. Audrey seemed to fall for it though, her cold expression softening. Eamon, you don't have to do this. They gazed at each other while I stood to the side, feeling more like an outsider. The bitterness in my heart was too intense to ignore. I wanted to take Audrey away, but at that moment, everything changed. A man with a crazed look suddenly rushed out from around the corner. He was holding a knife and charging towards us at full speed, shouting, Die! My face paled. In the heat of the moment, without thinking, I took a big step forward and to the left, shielding Audrey tightly behind me. But the man's target was Eamon. Just as he was about to reach us, I felt a hard shove on my back. I stumbled forward, inadvertently blocking Eamon. Amidst the terrified screams of passers-by, the knife plunged into my abdomen. Seeing he had stabbed the wrong person, the man released the knife and tried to flee, but was quickly subdued by several brave bystanders who pinned him to the ground. Realizing he couldn't escape, he glared at Eamon and started cursing viciously. Eamon, you disgusting freeloader. Why did you get together with my goddess? You bastard. Die, die. He continued ranting, but I could no longer hear him. Turns out that after being stabbed, the pain doesn't hit immediately. It's more of a delayed reaction. The knife was still lodged in my body, but it wasn't until I saw Audrey, who had pushed me in front of Eamon, frantically checking if Eamon was all right, that the pain began to spread from the wound, finally reaching my heart. Suddenly I felt so tired, and in so much pain. It was unbearable. Clutching my bleeding wound, I collapsed to the ground. In the last moment before I closed my eyes, I saw Audrey turn back in panic, frozen in place. 8 minutes after being stabbed, I was lifted into an ambulance. The doctors quickly discovered that my vital signs were rapidly declining. Audrey didn't know that for someone with aplastic anemia like me, any random cut could be fatal. I hadn't completely lost consciousness and could hear the chaos around me. I knew I was dying. Ironically, I was dying from taking a knife for Eamon. Recalling the moment when Audrey pushed me out without hesitation, I suddenly didn't know what the meaning of my persistence was. This play of loving me, she ultimately couldn't finish acting it out. As they were desperately trying to save me, I heard the system's judgment. Countdown ended. Regrettably, mission failed. I didn't feel much fear, perhaps because before dying, my heart had already completely shattered. However, in the next moment, the system continued, "Does the host choose to switch the target of pursuit?" I didn't immediately understand the meaning of this sentence. The system patiently began to explain, "The host has one chance to choose again. If you don't switch, the host will soon die. If you switch, the system will find a new target to pursue. After successfully completing the mission, the host can survive. Switch the target of pursuit and then survive." I felt life slipping away bit by bit, scenes from my life playing before my eyes like a flip book. Finally, it froze on the image of me lying in a pool of blood while Audrey ran towards Eamon. "Please make your choice quickly," the system urged. "I choose to switch the target of pursuit. Audrey, I don't want to love you anymore. This time, I truly want to live for myself." At the last moment, I was saved on the operating table. The doctors and nurses called it a miracle, but only I knew what really happened in those few seconds when death was approaching. During my hospital stay, I refused Audrey Cargill's requests to visit. Once I recovered enough, I checked out of the hospital, went home to pack my things, and rented a new flat. I didn't want any more interactions with Audrey Cargill. The incident with the knife-wielding fan trended on social media for many days and still garnered some attention. The man had been imprisoned for intentional assault. He was an obsessive fan of Elsie Chadwick and claimed he saw Eamon Carlisle and Elsie Chadwick behaving intimately. He even took photos. Those photos were posted online before the attack, causing quite a stir. In the pictures, Eamon Carlisle had his arm around Elsie Chadwick's waist as they entered a residential complex together. Their relationship seemed almost certain. I shook my head, remembering how pitifully self-righteous Eamon had acted in front of Audrey Cargill. I wondered how Audrey Cargill would feel knowing she'd been betrayed, but I no longer wanted to dwell on these thoughts. The most important thing now was, "System, who is the new target?" The system replied, "Don't rush, host. The system will notify you when the new target appears." 3 days later, a new tenant moved into the flat where I was staying. The girl stood at the door with her luggage, introducing herself with a bright smile. "Hello, I'm Mabel Lumley. Nice to meet you." At the same moment, the system's voice echoed in my mind. "New target has appeared. Mission initiated." Mabel Lumley was a very sunny and lovely girl. On the first day we lived together, I cooked many dishes. Mabel sat across from me, eating with great satisfaction. "Byron, you're such an amazing cook," she exclaimed. Her excitement was infectious, and my long quiet heart fluttered with joy. After the meal, Mabel firmly refused my offer to wash the dishes, carrying the plates to the kitchen. "It's only fair," she said. From that day on, Mabel remembered my culinary skills. She seemed to be a writer, spending her days at home typing away, occasionally pulling at her hair and complaining about lack of inspiration. At such times, she would blink her eyes at me and say, "If I could have some delicious food, I might just get a burst of creativity." Amused by her playful tone, I would put on an apron and start cooking. When we ran out of ingredients, she said to me, "Let's go shopping together. I've eaten so much of your food. Let me cover the groceries this time." I didn't mind such small matters, but I didn't refuse her offer either. I felt relaxed and happy when spending time with her. But just as we were walking out of the supermarket with our vegetables and groceries, We unexpectedly ran into someone, Audrey Cargill. She probably didn't expect to see me here either. After a moment of shock, she burst out with great joy. Byron, I've finally found you. Compared to her excitement, I was quite cold. Seeing Audrey walking towards me, I turned slightly, changing direction and passing her by. Audrey froze in place. A few seconds later, her voice sounded behind me. Byron, I know you're angry with me. You blame me for my poor judgment and for almost getting you killed. Towards the end, her voice broke with tears. But I truly regret it so much. Byron, can you forgive me? If it were the past me, upon hearing these words, I would have rushed over and taken her into my arms. However, now, I kept my eyes forward and didn't stop walking. When we got home, Mabel asked curiously, Byron, who was that just now? I remained silent for a moment before answering. Someone unimportant. Mabel nodded thoughtfully, not pressing further. After that day, Audrey changed her phone number several times to call and text me, but I blocked them all without exception. I thought she would give up, but to my surprise, she somehow found out my address and knocked on my door. When I saw her, I frowned, intending to close the door immediately, but she wedged half her body inside, looking at me pleadingly. Byron, I was wrong, I was truly wrong. Please don't ignore me, all right? Seeing my expression remain cold, she quickly added, I've taken back all of Eamon's resources. He's been shelved now, and I won't let him make a comeback. Byron, only you truly love me. I was foolish not to cherish that. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice full of pain and regret. Audrey, I don't care about Eamon, I said slowly. Or rather, I don't care about either of you. Audrey was struck by my cold tone. Tears instantly fell as she cried uncontrollably. No, Byron, don't treat me like this. I was about to ask her to leave when Mabel came out of the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. Byron, what's going on? She asked. I turned back, apologetic. Did we wake you from your nap? Before Mabel could answer, Audrey's incredulous voice rang out. Byron, who is she? She clutched at my sleeve, asking desperately, Did you leave me because of her? My patience was completely exhausted. Meeting her anguished gaze, I said coldly, I didn't leave because of anyone. The moment you pushed me under the knife for Eamon's sake, everything ended. Audrey, I don't love you anymore. After hearing these words, Audrey's face turned deathly pale. She seemed to have lost her soul and was easily pushed out the door by me. I didn't care how distraught she was and closed the door without hesitation. But Audrey didn't leave. After dinner, Mabel peeked through the peephole and said to me in surprise, Byron, she's still leaning against the door outside. I sighed, just ignore her. Not long after, a sudden storm broke out with thunder and lightning. The moment I heard the thunder, my expression froze on my face and I started trembling uncontrollably. Mabel immediately noticed something was wrong. Byron, what's the matter? Are you feeling unwell? With a shaky voice, I stuttered, Thunder. I'm afraid of thunder. Mabel quickly ran to the window, shut it tightly, and drew the curtains. She then turned on the lights in the house. I had already curled up on the sofa. She wiped the cold sweat from my forehead and, as another flash of lightning heralded more thunder, she covered my ears with her hands. The sound around me receded like a tide, and I could only hear my own rapid heartbeat. I saw Mabel's worried expression, her lips moving. She was saying, Byron, don't be afraid. Mabel stayed with me like this until midnight, until everything outside became quiet again. Later she fell asleep, her hands still covering my ears. I gently removed her hands, feeling a warmth flow through my heart. In the morning, when I opened the door to take out the rubbish, I found Audrey sitting curled up by the doorway, her face flushed unnaturally. Hearing the door open, she struggled to her feet. Byron, were you all right last night? I kept knocking, but no one answered. I was stunned, then realized the knocking must have been blocked out along with the thunder by Mabel's hands. So she still remembered I was afraid of thunder, Yet back then, no matter how much I begged, she still left me to go find Eamon. Just then, Mabel poked her head out beside me. Sorry about that. I was in a rush helping Byron last night and didn't get a chance to answer the door. Audrey seemed to go dizzy for a moment, swaying slightly. After steadying herself, she looked at me miserably. Byron, do you really not want me anymore? I'm feeling really unwell. Could you take me to the hospital? Please? Everything Audrey had done these past few days was beyond my understanding of her. I never expected her to humble herself like this for me. I didn't want this because it was meaningless. Audrey, you were the one who didn't want me first, I said calmly. If you're ill, take a taxi to the hospital. And please don't come here again. With that, I closed the door. Mabel stuck her tongue out at me. I said that on purpose just now. Serves her right for how she treated you before. Looking at her mischievous expression, I couldn't help but smile from the heart. Thank you, Mabel. What would you like to eat today? I'll make you anything. For several days, Audrey Cargill didn't appear again. My life no longer stirred up waves due to her disappearance. Now, my days were calm and fulfilling. But not long after, Audrey's mother came to me, pleading tearfully, Byron, I beg you, please go see Audrey. She's done something foolish. I saw a weakened Audrey in the hospital. She had attempted suicide by cutting her wrists, but fortunately was found in time and her life was saved. I walked to her side, my gaze complex. She lay in bed looking at me, her eyes gradually filling with tears. Byron, why didn't you tell me? I was taken aback. Why didn't you tell me that you left back then to get treatment? And even now, your illness hasn't been cured. She broke down sobbing. Byron, why didn't you tell me? For the first time in a long while, I felt a pang in my heart. At first, I didn't want you to worry. I would rather have died quietly than have you waste your life accompanying me. Later, I didn't want you to feel guilty or soften towards me because of my illness. I looked at her and said softly, Audrey, I've never regretted loving you, but it's also true that I don't love you anymore. Don't do anything foolish. Cherish what you have now and live well. Audrey could no longer bear it. She covered her eyes and burst into tears. But without you, how can I live well? I sighed and turned to leave. No matter what Audrey did, there was no possibility for us anymore. That evening, Mabel Lumley went out on an errand. Just as I finished washing the dishes, I received a call from her. B. Byron, can you come down and meet me? I feel like someone's following me. My face changed abruptly. Without even changing my shoes, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. As I ran downstairs, my heart was about to jump out of my throat. An overwhelming panic was engulfing me. Mabel couldn't be in danger. This was my only thought. After running several hundred meters out of the estate, I saw Mabel's anxious figure. She spotted me and quickened her pace, launching herself into my arms like a little missile. Byron, I was so scared. I patted her back, comforting her repeatedly. It's all right. It's all right. I'm here now. Come on, let's go home. As she held my hand with tear-filled eyes, a system announced in my mind, Congratulations, host. The love value of your target has reached the required level. Mission completed. Your illness will gradually be cured. I was still in a daze when I walked through the front door. Mabel, however, was very direct. She gulped down a glass of water, wiped her mouth and said to me, Byron, I think I like you. Can I pursue you? I was stunned by her blunt confession. Looking into her sparkling eyes, I found myself unable to say no. Mabel's affection came swiftly and intensely. She didn't beat around the bush. Her approach to pursuing someone was always straightforward. I asked her why she liked me. She replied matter-of-factly, Because you're great, Byron. You cook well, you're handsome, and you're gentle. I chuckled, but my heart softened uncontrollably. She dragged me out to go shopping, but we saw Audrey waiting downstairs. Byron, can you give me another chance, please? Audrey's gaze was plaintive as she tried to evoke my memories. We were so good together before. Can you really let it all go? Before I could speak, Mabel stepped in front of me. If you've done something wrong, you have to face the consequences. Why should the victim give you a chance to repent? She frowned, her voice clear and strong. Also, please stop bothering Byron. He'll be my boyfriend soon. At these words, both Audrey and I turned to look at her. Audrey's face turned deathly pale with disbelief, while I wore an expression of indulgent resignation. Byron, is what she's saying true? Audrey's voice was broken as she looked at me pleadingly, hoping for a denial. But as her eyes grew increasingly dejected, I smiled and took Mabel's hand. I believe it is. After this, Audrey disappeared from my life completely. Many years later, as Mabel leaned against me, reminiscing about this incident, she said sheepishly, "At that time, I just wanted to drive her away. I didn't expect you to actually agree." I stroked her hair. "Because you're wonderful too. I think I had already fallen for you."